I talk all the time about how healing really is a process and a practice. It takes a lot of patience to continue practicing over time to ultimately achieve the healing that you both desire and deserve. And I know that that can feel frustrating to people, that it does take time. You can't just make a decision and it's going to happen. However, there is one particular practice that, if you can be mindful of and practice with regularity, can make such a huge difference along this journey. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. So if you followed me for a while, you probably have an idea of what I am talking about. Today, I want to talk about it a little bit, but I also want to walk you through a little bit of a practice. And this is a practice that you can come back to, hopefully time and time again, because each time that you do, it hits a little bit differently. It penetrates a little bit more deeply. It kind of broadens your ideas about yourself and how you talk to yourself a little bit more. And that is self-compassion. And I know I talk about it a lot, and I talk about it so often because I believe that it really is, when it comes to all the different things that we practice, self-compassion is at kind of the foundation, or is part of the foundation of so much of how we change what we believe about who we are. And relatively recently, I talked about how unworthiness is so often at the core of all of the difficulties that we tend to have. And that is very real. And self-compassion, among other things, but at a core level, self-compassion is kind of the thread that runs through it all, the thing that most significantly changes our sense of worthiness. So one question that comes up quite often is, what does self-compassion really look like? Or what is the difference between self-compassion and self-care? So I want to talk a little bit about that first. And I think people can use them interchangeably often. Self-compassion I would consider as a form of self-care. But self-compassion is more specifically how you talk to yourself. Self-care can encompass so many different aspects of behaviors and thoughts and actions and nurturing types of things that you can do for yourself, from very small everyday types of things to really big things. So self-care really is this huge umbrella of a lot of different things that you can do. Self-compassion really is about how you are speaking to yourself. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is how your automatic thought process works, right? And it's reinforcing the beliefs that you developed very early on in your life, those core beliefs, those false beliefs. And in our automatic thought process, those thoughts are being played out over and over and over again. Sometimes, depending on the day, maybe even 1,000 or more times. You might have very similar types of thoughts that, while the actual words might be different, the point of the thought is basically the same. And again, sometimes you might be very aware of what those thoughts are. Sometimes, for some people, you may not have any awareness that you're actually thinking anything. But you'll notice a shift in how you're feeling. So the thoughts, the things that we are saying to ourselves, and just as natural, for normal human beings, we have thousands of thoughts that go through our mind a day. For people that struggle with trauma, with unworthiness and self-doubt and anxiety and all kinds of things like that, by far the majority, huge majority, 90%, if not more, of those thoughts that we have are reinforcing in some capacity those negative core false beliefs. The way that we counter it, and in some aspects, there's different pieces that go into it, but ultimately the only way that we can really combat that is by practicing self-compassion. Part of it is being aware of your thoughts and kind of the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy and change your thought, change your feeling, right? It's not that simple, and I've talked about that before. And self-compassion is a process of learning to be able to speak to yourself differently. It's not just like an affirmation. It is about understanding. It's about grace. So, if you were to say to yourself, if one of the kind of repeating thoughts that you have over and over again is, I wish I could do that, but I'm not smart enough, or I wish I could do that, but I just don't have time. I wish I could do that, but nothing ever works out for me. I wish I could do that, but I'm not strong enough, right? So those are all different types of thoughts, but each of those thoughts reinforce a belief. And ultimately that belief is likely unworthiness. But even the idea of not being good enough, not being deserving, not being capable, certainly not being worthy of whatever the wish is. So with self-compassion, and it's a process and a practice because it can never come naturally that when you're in that space for you to have those compassionate thoughts, because your brain, your mind is automatically repeating the same types of thoughts that you've had for years, if not decades. So that becomes the automatic default. The practice of self-compassion is about gaining awareness and shifting how you are speaking to yourself. Now, you may not believe the things that you're going to be saying to yourself, and that can create some difficulty, and that's where compassion plays an important role, right? Because when you say to yourself, like if the negative thought is, I don't deserve that, whatever that good thing might be. And if you say to yourself, I am deserving of that, there's going to be resistance from that core belief. And ultimately, a lot of that is about self-protection, which I know doesn't make a lot of sense. I've talked about that before. But there's going to be some resistance that likely comes up when you believe, I'm not deserving. You're tapping into all those times that you've found so-called evidence that you're not deserving. And then you try to say, I am deserving of this thing. It's not going to feel real. It's not going to feel good even, because that resistance, that self-protection is going to come up. So the practice of self-compassion is about the awareness. It's about being able to remind yourself of why you're deserving, even if you don't necessarily fully believe it. And this is where you've heard me talk about comparison and how bad it can be. But when it comes to self-compassion, one of the practices that we can begin to engage in, or continue to practice, is thinking about somebody that you care about or that you know and value and respect. Thinking about that person in a similar situation. And would you say to them that they are undeserving of that? Now, I know it's easy to say that, and it's easy to say, well, no, I wouldn't think that. But I can't really apply that to myself. This is why it's a practice and a process. So the practice I'm going to walk you through today is kind of an example of how we can think about some of these things and apply it to our own experiences and situations. And I do want to be very clear that practicing self-compassion, building kind of a natural practice of self-compassion, really does take a lot of practice. It takes intentionality. It takes being in that discomfort that can come up and staying with the practice. Because for me, self-compassion really is, it is about compassion for yourself, of course, but it's about the ability to be able to see yourself through a more objective lens. It's still about being able to be accountable, acknowledging things that maybe we can improve. It's not pretending that we're perfect. It's being able to do those things without judgment, without ridicule, without shame. It's meeting it with understanding, with grace, and sometimes when needed, self-forgiveness. And that's something else I've talked about quite a bit before too. I think a lot of things that people need or think that they need forgiveness for, they actually don't really need forgiveness for. And obviously that's my own personal opinion. But we tend to think that what we're doing is so wrong or so bad or whatever, that forgiveness is the thing that matters. And generally speaking, I really don't believe it is about forgiveness, other people's or our own. I think much of the time it really is about creating compassion and understanding for ourselves while still taking accountability when that is the thing that we should be doing. So I'm going to read to you an exercise, one of the exercises in Deeply Rooted, because this is just what I have around. It's something that I know a lot about since I wrote it. So I think this is a good practice to really think about generally, but in particular, this one is about when you feel like you've screwed up, when you've done something wrong, when you've made a mistake, whether that is just your own perceived fear around being bad or undeserving or whatever, or maybe you really have made a mistake. Maybe you have done something that's even hurt somebody else's feelings. Maybe you've done something that an apology to the person would be important. Either one, this practice is an example of some of the things that you can do to help build a practice, an experience, which is even more like the point, the goal, so that we can experience what self-compassion can do. It really is the antidote to shame. And the amount of shame that we tend to carry is typically, and I say this from experience, just my professional experience, the amount of shame that so many people tend to carry goes beyond what they even recognize so much of the time. And that was true in my case as well. So you can save this video and come back and do this practice. And I would say maybe come back and do it many times whenever you feel that you need to do it, or you just want to practice a little self-compassion. But I'd encourage you to try to listen. And if you have the availability, if you want to pause this and go grab a journal or something, maybe give yourself a little bit of space, either as I'm walking you through the practice or afterward, to just kind of write some notes and maybe take this a little bit further into just kind of processing what comes up for you. So each kind of practice in this book starts with a quote or an affirmation or something along that line. So I'm just going to kind of read through this with you. There's some questions in here, and might pause and give you just a little, a couple of moments to consider. And again, if you've got something to write with, then write it down. My mistakes do not define my worthiness. Take a breath and take that in. That is as real for you as it is anybody else. My mistakes do not define my worthiness. I'd like you to think of something you view as a failure or mistake. The word you use might be different: screwed up, messed up, incapable, etc. It could be something from today or a long time ago. So take a moment and consider something. It really doesn't matter what it is. For so many people, when they are reinforcing an idea that they're not good enough, that they're a failure, they tend to go back to, there's usually maybe one, sometimes a couple or a few different things that they specifically go back to. And so notice what does come to mind when you think about this, or does it feel like there's just too many to be able to narrow it down? And if that's the case, maybe think about the thing that your mind goes to, the thing that you tend to replay over and over again, more so than others. Notice how you feel when thinking about it. So how you feel, what's happening in your body. Notice what thoughts come to mind about it or yourself. Does it bring more negative thoughts? Do you find that you start coming up with other reasons why that is true, that thing that you believe is bad about yourself, that you're a failure or whatever? Do you find yourself coming up with more examples? Do you start thinking about other kinds of ways that you think of yourself as being not good enough? Does the situation bring up shame, guilt, or embarrassment? Is it a reminder of why you're not enough, worthy, or deserving? Or maybe a reminder of why you're bad or wrong in some way. However it leaves you feeling, I'd like you now to try to connect with either self-compassion or self-forgiveness, whichever feels most relevant. Maybe keeping in mind what I said about the idea of forgiveness. If you have hurt somebody, I think self-forgiveness may be important. But if it's more of a feeling that you're not enough because, I don't know, it took you 2 tries to do something instead of 1, maybe that's not so much about self-forgiveness. Maybe that's more about self-compassion. We all make mistakes. Sometimes they're big. Sometimes they're small. Sometimes they do impact someone else. And sometimes they impact only us. And what tends to happen is, whether they're just impacting us or somebody else, we will beat ourselves up about it, sometimes for years or decades. None of us can excel at everything. We all fall short of meeting our or someone else's, often unrealistic, expectations. None of this defines who we are. None of this makes us bad, unworthy, or unlovable. We are all perfectly imperfect human beings. It's in this humanness that we find connection. It's in this humanness that we can be and show up authentically. And that authenticity is what builds deep, healthy connection. So your practice, write a note of grace or forgiveness for yourself for the mistake that you identified or the perceived failure that you identified. So just writing a note, it could be very brief, or maybe writing a letter of self-compassion and grace and understanding, or if needed, forgiveness. And take your time with this. Maybe even it's something that you come back to a couple of different times to allow yourself to really notice and explore what is present for you around it. And then each exercise ends with an inhalation and an exhalation. So after writing this letter or note, inhaling love and exhaling constriction. So opening to receiving and experiencing love, and exhaling the constriction that we experience when we're feeling like we're not enough. So I would love to hear from you. How was that? Are you tired of hearing about self-compassion? I know for so many people, and I've had these conversations and I've seen it happen so often, especially early on, when I talk about self-compassion with clients, or even in a group situation. There are people that, quite a few people really, who will often sigh, out of kind of a little bit of a frustration, or roll their eyes, because it can feel exhausting. It doesn't seem like it's the answer to things, because we believe that we need to change. But the changes that we actually do need to make, which are about believing in ourselves and setting boundaries and allowing ourselves to take risks and be vulnerable, those things happen when we are able to be compassionate with ourselves, when we feel safer in being able to do that. And that happens from creating self-compassion. We don't feel that sense of safety when we are ridiculing and shaming ourselves. We feel armored up. We feel protected by this outer layer that doesn't allow anything in or out. And this simple practice, all of the practices in this book, and I say simple, doesn't mean that they're easy. And I want to be clear about that. But all of these practices, and I talk about different things, different aspects of where self-compassion might be really important for you. They are specifically meant for you to do over and over again, to come back to over and over again, because you're not going to do this once and suddenly you don't hold on to negative feelings about being a failure or not being good enough, or the regret that you have about a mistake. One time isn't going to do it, because one time there's still likely going to be a part of you that is feeling some resistance to it, that isn't buying into it yet. But the more that you come back to it, the more open you become, the more real it begins to feel. And believe it or not, over time, as you continue to practice self-compassion, which also means that you are healing, that is part of the healing, over time, instead of immediately going to those thoughts of how screwed up you are, how wrong you are, how much you fail, or whatever it is, your thoughts, instead of going there, when you make a mistake or you don't get the thing done that you wanted to get done, instead of your thoughts going to that place, they actually do go to a place of self-compassion. And that can look different depending on the specific circumstance. And that is part of the freedom. When I talk about healing as freedom, that is part of the freedom, because you can show up as yourself. And if you do make a mistake, you can try new things. And if you don't get it right, you're okay. You don't feel like a failure. You don't feel embarrassed. You don't feel unworthy of something good because you didn't live up to the expectation that you had or that you hoped to achieve. You experience the self-compassion in an automatic way, and that is freedom. Like right now, the automatic thoughts are reinforcing those core false beliefs. As time goes on, the automatic thoughts become self-compassionate thoughts. They become thoughts of understanding and grace. And you deserve to have that. And you are capable of experiencing that with practice. And when I say practice, over time, you'll continue to practice over a year, over 2, over 5. You will continue to practice, because some days it might be a little bit harder, depending on how much vulnerability there is, how much stress there is in your life. There can sometimes be days that, because those false beliefs are so deeply ingrained for so long, when you're particularly vulnerable, sometimes those can creep back in. But when you've been practicing, you can identify it, so therefore it doesn't have the same level of impact on you. And you can more easily, meaning that there's less resistance, switch to being understanding and self-compassionate. So I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about this? If you're somebody that is unsure about self-compassion or finds that you roll your eyes when somebody talks about it, I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about it? And if you're somebody who has practiced self-compassion and recognized that it is beneficial, or how it helps, or how, what might have been helpful in you getting to the place where you could practice self-compassion more easily, I'd love for you to share that too, so that other people can see that it's not just meant for certain types of people, that it really is available to everyone. But it does take patience and practice. Thanks so much for being here. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.